So, good morning. I want to talk this morning about how nothing belongs to you but the journey. And, you I'm a fan of the 13th century Persian poet Rumi, and his main teacher, a person called Shams Tabrizi, was a brilliant kind of wandering ascetic back in those days and is reputed to have been Rumi's teacher. And there's a lot of overlap between what Rumi wrote about and talked about and the Dharma. So I want to work from that today. And the quote from Tabrizi is, "You fear losing what was never yours. Nothing belongs to you but the journey. You fear losing what was never yours. Nothing belongs to you but the journey." And he's alluding there to a particular kind of suffering, I think, that most of us know, but we don't really get too close to. And it's the suffering of grasping, of clutching, that white knuckle grip we maintain with our relationships, with our possessions, with our identities, with the outcomes that we've convinced ourselves we're entitled to, and on and on. And Tabrizi, as I said, he really cuts through this delusion of ownership, if you will, with real clarity. Um, and from this perspective of our path, this is just not another uh, Middle Ages poem. It's really a diagnosis because it names the precise mechanism by which we create so much of our unnecessary suffering. And if we look at it honestly, I think we begin to see that. We wake up in the morning and we immediately sort of shift into ownership mode, ownership of our partner, of our career, of our identity, of our health, of our reputation, of our plans for the weekend, on and on and on. And we construct this sort of elaborate architecture of possessions around things that are by their very nature impermanent, by their very nature flowing through us like water through our fingers. Now, this experience is no moral failing to think we own this. It's a conditioned habit of the mind. It's just the way our minds work. But the Buddha's teaching on attachment, Upadana, points to the same mechanism. We grasp at experiences, we grasp at relationships, we grasp at things. And not because we're greedy or bad people, but because we've not yet seen clearly the nature of this mechanism of grasping and clinging. So just consider a close relationship. We talk about these like my partner, my friend, my child, which implies we sort of have this implicit ownership. It's just a practical use of the way we use language. But if we look at it more carefully, we see that this person we're clinging to is constantly changing just as we are. They're a river of moods. They're a river of thoughts. Their cells in their body are changing. They're having experiences that are always in flux, always moving, not holding still for sometimes even a single moment. That person we fell in love with 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 50 years ago is not the same person that sits across us from breakfast every morning. They were never ours in any fixed sense. They are a living, unfolding organism that we happen to be witnessing and participating with. And so when we see this clearly, something remarkable happens. And this is the beauty of the Buddhist wisdom that Tabrizi picks up on. The fear loosens, not because we care any less, but because we stop trying to freeze that which is alive and ever changing. So Tabrizi says we fear losing what was never ours. And what he's talking about that, what is this fear he's referring to? In practice, when we slow down enough to observe our thought processes, okay, if we're sitting in meditation, for instance, or we're having a difficult moment, we notice that the fear of loss is often not about the object itself. It's about this sense of self that we've constructed around that object. So much of how we construct ourselves is based upon my this, my that, my the other. When I fear losing my job, I'm often fearing this loss of identity of being this professional or being this truck driver or whatever. When I fear losing my health, I'm fearing the collapse of the story that I'm somehow vital and capable and full of energy. When I fear a relationship ending, I'm fearing this emptiness where this beloved partner once defined me. This is what I think makes Tabrizi's teaching so practically relevant. The fear is not necessarily about losing the thing. It's about who we believe we are without it or without these things. It really goes right to our ego. And this brings us to one of the most liberating, though initially I would suggest terrifying insights that the path offers us. The self that is trying to protect through all this, through grasping and clinging, is itself a construction. It too was never a fixed entity. Okay, so that's the first half of his teaching. And then we get to the second half, which is where we move from diagnosis to freedom. Nothing belongs to us but the journey. So what does this mean to own only the journey? In practical terms, it means the only thing that is truly ours is this moment of experience, this breath, this step, these words, this act of attention. Okay? Not the destination, not the outcome, not the accumulation of all these moments that I call my life. Just this living, breathing process right here, right now. Now, this is easily mistaken, I think, sometimes for nihilism. But it's not a teaching that says nothing matters. In fact, I would suggest quite the opposite. When we release our grip on outcomes, on professions, and we don't give them up, we just don't squeeze them so tightly. When we release our grip on them, lighten our grip on them, we become available to experience the journey itself. And if we're so busy clutching and clinging and grasping, we're never available for the journey. Have you ever noticed that some of your moments of deepest joy were moments when you sort of forgot yourself? One of the terms we psychologists use is flow. This idea that we're so absorbed in the experience that I sort of am not paying attention to Jeff and all his worries and all his clinging and all his craziness. I find this often, I write every day, usually early in the morning. And if I really get in the zone when I'm writing, really get in the flow of writing, I just forget me. I mean, I'm just so locked in on that. I'm just really in the zone. And it really is a joyful experience. I mean, it just really gives me a lot of energy and satisfaction. So whether that's a conversation in which we're fully and deeply engaged, a landscape we're looking at, a piece of art in a museum. I remember when we went to see the Statue of David when we were abroad, it just took my breath away, this massive piece of marble. The face of someone we love, all that grasping tends to go quiet in those moments. We're outside of that grasping and clinging self. And I think this is what it feels like to own only the journey, the experience in the moment. It's really, I think, a powerful teaching. So how do we work with this? Let's get practical here for a minute. How do we work with this in our daily lives? First of all, we notice, as we always do, notice the gripping. Throughout the day, we just take a minute, we pause, and we say, what am I holding tightly right now? Am I holding tightly that I wish the traffic would move faster? Am I holding tightly that I wish you would act differently? Am I holding tightly that I wish the line would move quicker? Am I holding tightly that I wish I was, 15 pounds lighter? I mean, when we check in about the stuff, we're always clinging and grasping and holding something tightly. It might be an expectation of how this next meeting should go. It might be an expectation or a need for someone to respond to our message right away or with certain content. It might be resistance to some change that's already happening that I'm not happy about. But just notice the grip. That's all we do initially. We notice the grip. We don't need to force ourselves to let it go. We don't need to just, white knuckle it. But awareness itself begins to soften the clutching and gripping. Some of us have talked about this recently. It's just It's just that noticing itself just sort of breaks that pattern, breaks that cycle. It just puts an interruption. It's a circuit breaker. So we notice. The next step in the practice is reminding ourselves this is not mine. This is temporary. This is impermanent. You know, this contemplative teachers for millennia have been talking about this. Okay. So for example, when anxiety about the future arises, when we feel the tightening around some anticipated loss, we remind ourselves whatever I'm afraid of losing was never mine to keep. I never owned it. Not in the form of resignation, but in the form of seeing reality clearly. The Buddha always asks us to see things clearly. And here's the payoff with reality, when we stop fighting against it, it's far more spacious than the stories we make up about it. It's just frees us up from all that clinging to the story, clinging to the outcome, clinging to how we want things to be. And then the third step is to return to the journey. When we find ourselves, for instance, living in some imagined future, we're planning, we're worrying, we're strategizing, we're what ifing. We come back to the step we're taking right now. We come back to this moment right now, the breath we're breathing right now, that single irreplaceable moment of experience that is happening right now. Not unlike if you're standing in the museum and looking at that statue of David, or standing outside looking at that sunset, or listening to that incredible symphony or piece of music. This is our journey. That is what belongs to us. As Tabrizi says, nothing belongs to us but the journey. And here's the paradox. When we go there, it is enough. It's more than enough. It's always been enough. We don't need more. So we strive to release the grip so we can be with the moment, be fully locked into a conversation with a friend, be fully attentive to what's in front of us. The teaching suggests there's a quiet joy available to us when we stop trying to own and cling and grasp to whatever passes through us. Speaking of joy, it is the joy of a traveler who has finally set down an impossibly heavy bag they didn't need to carry. The landscape has not changed. The path is still the path. But everything feels different when our hands are open and not grasping, when our eyes are open, when we're open, when our senses are open. Tabrizi wandered through the world as an ascetic with almost nothing. But if you read his stuff, his presence was so powerful, his being present with the moment, that he really opened up Rumi's eyes to be one of the greatest poets in human history, just through his teachings. Tabrizi owned nothing but the journey. But the journey to him was everything. But we don't need to become wandering mystics or wandering ascetics to get there. We only need to see with greater and greater clarity what we fear losing was only always on loan to us. We never really took possession of it. Our relationships, our health, our roles, our very fundamental sense of self, all of it is borrowed. All of it is passing through. And yes, initially this might scare the heck out of us, but in the end, it is liberating. No more do we need to constantly be clutching things and clutching experiences so tightly. Because when we do that, we only see them slip through our fingers like trying to hold on to water. And when we open to that, open the hand, there's this tender, luminous process of being alive and paying attention to where we are right now. It is the one thing that cannot be taken from us. You talk about people that are in terrible situations, incarcerated or whatever. When they're on this path, they will say to you, and I remember Nelson Mandela talking about when he was in prison, they can't take this away from me. They can't take this moment away from me. They take everything else. Because what we're talking about is not a thing at all. It's what we are. It's our core. You know, so we hold lightly what passes through us, what comes into our lives. We give ourselves fully to the path beneath our feet, to the moment. And when we find in the openness of unclenched hands a freedom that we thought never was possible. So those are some thoughts from Tabrizi this morning.